Hey, everybody, it's the waitingfornextyear.com podcast, soon to be part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Little spoiler alert there. We are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Thanks for joining us. We are talking about sports. Before we went live, we were talking about how just COVID worn out we are. So I know my last episode was about vaccines, which I had a really good time doing. I thought it was informative, but we're not going to go COVID crazy here.
Look,
How's it going, Andrew?
You talked to an expert last time. Now it's my turn.
How do you feel about COVID non-medical?
Listen here. I've read some articles, at least two, and I can make my own decisions, Craig. I can decide for myself.
Well, and you know what? And that's actually kind of an interesting place to start. Like, how much different do you feel talking about sports, talking about like when we first started blogging about sports and you guys started waiting for next year? I came shortly after it began. It's been over 10 years now. And man, was I strong in my opinions when we first started, and the entire landscape has changed. And I don't feel the same way. Like I barely ever feel as strongly as I used to feel on a daily basis.
So it's funny you say that because, like, I think you have to feel very strong in your opinions in order to start writing, and putting it out there in the public. And I think that was like, I know for me, that was why I started doing it. Was I was just like, you know what? Like at the time, I didn't like what we were getting from the sports sections in newspapers and sports websites. And you got to remember, like, blogs were not that common back then. There was no Twitter. Like, you were getting your sports news from ESPN, and the sport, like, newspapers. Like, even if it was a website, a lot of times it was like the newspapers. And like, we had Brian Windhorst, who was awesome at the time, but like, I felt like in Cleveland we weren't getting very good coverage. I was like, you know what, like, I feel like I've got decent opinions, I'm going to try it. And so you start out and like you feel very like set in your ways and stuff like that. And what's funny is what happens to you is, like, as you start writing and like really having your name put out there, like, next to things, like, I think that for sure, like, sort of begins to soften you a little bit. But also, I just think it's a matter of experience. Like, the more you see different things as you do this, the more you realize, like, it's okay to have opinions, but you realize, like, especially in sports, like, literally anything can happen. And it doesn't, like, I know everybody likes to, freezing cold takes and likes to go back and like, oh, you were wrong about that. Well, maybe, but like, there was sound logic in why I had the opinion that I had. Like, it made sense at the time. It just didn't play out that way. You learn to, like, you got to kind of learn that, like, just because you have an opinion, it doesn't have anything to do with what's right or wrong or anything like that. It's just, sports are crazy, and you just try to have fun with it.
It's funny. I was trying to make that point on Twitter during the Browns game at some point, just because I said that, and we've talked about this. I think you and I have talked about Joe Schobert. There is logic to letting Joe Schobert go and sign a big deal with some other team.
Mm-hmm.
That's logical. What's not logical is not adequately replacing him and having a very inexperienced and young linebacking core that is thin and can't make the plays that you need to play to stop the run in the NFL. So both things are true. Like, I'm not saying you got to spend 10 million a year on Joe Schobert. I'm just saying I'd rather spend 10 million a year on Schobert than deal with the some of the linebacking core that we have right now.
Yeah. And I also especially appreciate, I'm sure there are people who, when Joe Schobert missed a tackle on Sunday,
sucks.
Oh, see, that's why we didn't sign him. You gotta love that. So,
well, I'm so happy that Andrew Sendejo made a couple plays, because now all the suckitude that he's had all year long doesn't matter. It doesn't count.
That's right.
He made a couple good plays.
He made a play, 2 plays. He had 2 plays. I mean, what can you say about the guy, right?
One game, 2 plays in one game.
We just like turned into Friday fumble there for a second.
I know, but it also it also happens to Baker Mayfield. You know, he had
Yeah.
an up and down game. He made some nice throws. He missed two really big ones. One of the things that I was pointing out to a friend of mine today, though, you know, the one giant miss that he had to Rashard Higgins in the end zone, that's not a physical error. When after the game, he explained it really well. And by the way, we should talk about post game Baker. It's the post game Baker
It's
this
so
year
good.
is so much better than he has been. But he was saying, you know, he read the play wrong at the line of scrimmage, and he was still focused on a different option. And if he'd done it right the first time, if his head had migrated to the next option, he wouldn't have been scrambling to throw it so late and so hard and everything else. So that is more a mental error than a physical one. And I know it's not cool to make excuses for Baker Mayfield because he was the number one overall pick, but those are the kinds of things that can be corrected with experience and time in an offense and having a coach for more than 1 year and having an off season.
Yeah, I, uh, I certainly I would prefer his issues. I think at this point to be mental versus physical because it's easier to look at the mental side of the game for him and what he's been through. And I don't need to rehash it. Like everybody knows how many coaches and coordinators and blah blah blah. Like I've said like a million times, if you want an excuse for Baker, like they're there. Like, and maybe I shouldn't even call them excuses. Maybe they're reasons, But like I still believe like his arm talent is still there. Like the guy, the accurate quarterback that came in, especially in his rookie year, and just let it fly without much hesitation, and that arm talent is still there. Uh, the thing is like when people talk about like, well, is Baker not the guy? And I've certainly cooled in like on how I feel about that, but my thing with that is like it doesn't make any sense. You're not going to just get rid of the guy right now. Like you've got to give him time in this offense. Like take away those whatever you want to call them excuses or reasons. Let's get rid of those. Let's give him some stability. Let's give him an off season. Let's give him multiple years in the same offense. And then see if he develops in that. And if he does get more comfortable and if he does cut down on those mistakes and, is more consistent in making those kind of throws, then great, we know we've got our guy. And, if not, then we can figure out what to do. But like, I, I've seen a few people like indicate that the Browns should just cut ties with Baker now because he's not the guy. And it's like, even if Baker's not the guy, he's still a better quarterback than anything the Browns have had since Tim Couch, bar none. And so like at the worst case scenario, it's still better than the complete shit show that we've been putting out there. So I I don't understand any thought of like, oh, if he's not the guy, let's get rid of him right now. Now, if
Browns
he's not the
fans have
guy,
been conditioned to think that amputation is the way to
yeah,
heal a broken limb.
yeah, that's perfectly said.
We do it with
That's
our
really good.
coaches, we do it with executives. Like this was my frustration with John Dorsey. Not to say that he's perfect or John Dorsey was so much better than fill in the blank GM or executive that we'd had going back to Ray Farmer, going back to George Kokinis, who didn't even have the job really. Like we'd seen even Mike Holmgren, who it was probably a logical experiment to try and bring in Mike Holmgren.
Sure.
It did not work. It didn't work. And so, sure, Dorsey had flaws. He was not perfect. But this
Yep.
idea that he just had to be chopped out, we couldn't possibly win because he made the mistake of hiring Freddie Kitchens. Like, you've at some point you have to let people learn from their mistakes and become the best version of themselves. You're either going to create a situation for them to flourish or most people to flourish, or
Mhm.
you're going to keep chopping people out and not address the real issue.
Yeah, and I think like figuring out stability is a learning process for everybody. It's obviously been a learning process uh for the entire like for the organization. I'm talking the Haslams, obviously, certainly, the players, and the fans, like even the fans. So I think you're right. I think there's just we've we have such an outside view of the way a normal franchise operates in the NFL that it's like jarring to us to understand that like it's okay to let Baker have a couple years to try to figure it out, and it's okay to like the Browns can draft some quarterbacks that they kind of like if they want to like put some pressure on him and see if there's a guy that they feel pretty strong about. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but you can do both things. Like you don't have to just say, "Oh, Baker's not the guy. We need to get him out of there." Like I completely reject that, and I've been seeing more and more of that sort of sneak up, and it's just you gotta love Browns fans. Like the Browns are 8-3, and we're still finding ways to be mad at this team every week and frustrated and angry, and it's like let's just relax and enjoy this ride. Like the Browns are 8-3. It's a good football team. Like it's just I don't know. Like I'm just really been struggling a lot with that whole like hyper game by game analysis of and who we have to get rid of and stuff like that. Like again, yes for the Browns,
except Sendejo.
Yeah, except Sendejo, but no, the Browns like we're used to thinking of the offseason in November and December. Like that's when we start thinking about like when we're going to make changes and stuff like that. But we don't have to do that this year. Like let's worry instead about how we're going to match up next week, how we're going to get into the playoffs, and can we do enough on defense to actually win a playoff game? Like those are way more interesting questions to me than anything about whether or not Baker is the guy. Like, well, that'll come with time.
It's almost like people are frustrated that they can't just go back to the same old conversations that we've been having with the same old problems over and over and over again. And I get that with the same old Browns too. There were a lot of people that were concerned that if the Browns somehow managed to get screwed by the refs and lose a game in Jacksonville on Sunday, that it's all rolls downhill after that. No mention of the fact that Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, Baker Mayfield, like these guys are not the same crew. Jarvis Landry, is there a more important player acquisition, veteran player acquisition in the history of modern Browns football than Jarvis Landry?
I really can't think of who you could even possibly consider.
Because he's not same old Browns.
No,
like,
and I think
how much more evidence do you need?
I think he's made that his explicit goal from day one. Since the moment he stepped in here, he was going to change the culture, and he's talked about it. I mean, obviously, most famously, the Hard Knocks thing, which you can take that with a grain of salt. Some people think he just did it because he knew the cameras were on, whatever. But
Corey Coleman was here when he first got here.
Yeah, I mean, and he's a guy who has just led by example time and time and time again. He's never complained about anything. He's been the absolute professional. He's everything you would want in a guy, and he performs on the football field as well. And so, yeah, I mean, you've got good players, and like the Browns have had opportunities to slide into the same old Browns. And I go back to the game against Washington football team, that where the Browns had the halftime lead, and then they gave the lead back to Washington to start the second half. Same old Browns, they lose that game. The Cowboys game, they come storming back. Same old Browns, they lose that game. And I look at when the Browns lost to the Raiders, same old Browns, that season begins rolling downhill. Instead, they just picked themselves back up and won a couple games in a row. And like this Browns team is resilient, and I love watching this team. Like they frustrate me at times, sure. Like there's times when it's ugly and things don't look great, and the defense can be maddening, But like a Browns team that just keeps making the plays when they have to, getting unbelievable heroic performances from their absolute best players. I mean, Myles Garrett has saved so many games. Denzel Ward has made huge plays. Nick Chubb is just an absolute monster.
MVP.
Absolutely. Kareem Hunt has made some huge plays for us when we need them. Yeah, and Jarvis came up massive yesterday when the Browns needed him. And there's been a couple other times this season where there's been games where things have been going bad and they just needed Jarvis to make a play, and he's done it. And so,
and you know what else is fun? It's cute to complain about the refs after the Browns actually won the game. It's not so much fun to complain about the refs if the Browns come out on the losing end. The Browns won a game against a bad football team without 4 or 5 of their best players after losing one of the best wide receivers in the game by sticking to their game plan, surviving mistakes by their first year head coach. I mean, him going for it on fourth down instead of going up by 11 or potentially going up by 11 with a field goal, his continued use of the empty sets drives me bananas. But for every one of those things, there are 3 times where he commits to the run and he won't give up on the run that had us going crazy when Hugh Jackson was trying to coach DeShone Kizer. And like DeShone Kizer must have thrown 70 passes in a game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that. Like, I really felt like this last game, this Jacksonville game, was probably the first time I felt since the opening Baltimore game that the game plan really kind of got away from Stefanski at times. He made a lot of decisions that I thought were curious, and so, but it's like, yeah, he's a first year head coach. Like he's figuring these things out, but I still feel overall he's had this team buy in from day one. I mean, I don't want to just go for the like low hanging fruit and making these points, but like, I just think it's so important to remember, like he took over a first time head coach and wasn't allowed to meet with his other coaches. He had no real training camp. Or no preseason, I should say. It took forever for him to be able to ever even like really directly talk to his players. You couldn't ask for a harder situation for a first year head coach to walk into. And I just feel like he's done a great job. Like never complained about it. He instead has said, this looked at this COVID thing as an opportunity for the Browns, really, that if we do the right things and try to take care of ourselves, that there's going to be teams that really mess themselves up with this, and we can try and stay out of that. And I think the Browns have done a pretty good job, not perfect, but pretty good job of doing the right things so far. Knock on wood.
Well, and one of the interesting things is Myles Garrett test positive, and the Browns did have kind of a mini outbreak.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened in Baltimore was a huge spread event in the facility, like a huge mistake. And I think what we've learned, and yeah, we're talking COVID a little bit, but I think what we've learned from COVID is that you can make a mistake by actually making a mistake, and it can kind of happen to you accidentally. Like it's not usually, it'd be nice if only people who acted improperly caught it.
Sure.
But when you've got community spread around the country the way we have right now, it can kind of happen to anybody. You can't necessarily say that every single person who caught it was being irresponsible.
Yeah, and I think that's where you just look at it as sort of like playing the odds, though. You put yourself in the best situation. You try and take care of as many scenarios or outcomes that you can imagine. And that's where I go back to even like watching some of the early like Building the Browns stuff where they showed, the sort of levels that they were thinking in terms of how to keep everybody safe and how to limit exposure that would just wreck the entire team. And they've been very conscious about that and trying to avoid that. And yeah, absolutely. Tomorrow we could find out it's rampant. The Browns all have it. Their game gets postponed, blah, blah, blah. And it wouldn't necessarily mean they changed anything and did anything different than what they've been doing. It could just be that this virus just got its way in there and spread around. But the point is you just got to do like, try and take care of, the weakest links, if you will, as best as you can, and try and play those odds and keep them in your favor. And that's what I feel like the Browns have done. Now, obviously, I'm not there. I don't see everything that goes on. So I can't say that I know for sure the way they interact in the locker room or whatever. But just from the things I've seen that they've talked about, and just even seeing like even seeing the players, some of the players even wearing the masks when doing the Zoom conferences, and I just feel like there's been a message with the Browns that they have been taking it very seriously, and I think that's a reflection of what Kevin Stefanski has taught them from day one, and what he's preached to them about how you can go home and you can complain about it all you want and say how much you hate wearing the mask, but the second you step on our grounds, you're going to stop complaining. You're going to do what's expected of you, and we're going to try and be safe.
That was one of my
been the
favorite
message.
things, and you and I have talked about it before, but it's worth repeating. That mentality of go ahead and get your complaints out, but the minute you walk through that door, it's time for business. It's time to get to work.
It doesn't matter if you don't like it.
Yeah. Nobody, no, it's one of those things that, and I know it's a little self-helpy, but Gary Vaynerchuk is like, he always says nobody cares about your complaints other than you and your other loser friends.
Yeah.
And it's
so
a little
true,
bit blunt,
but it's so true.
It's not going to help you when you face Derrick Henry and the Titans.
Yep.
It's not going to make you any more prepared to play down 4 or 5 really key players in Jacksonville.
No. Yeah, and I mean that applies to so much. That's obviously it's the whole basis in football of the next man up mentality. Injuries happen to everybody. You have to overcome it, and if you succumb to just complaining and saying "woe is me," you're not helping yourself. That's every minute you say "woe is me," why is this happening to us? Is a minute that you're not preparing for your next opponent, and that's the same thing with COVID. I feel like with the Browns has been. Every minute that you're complaining about it is a minute, that you're not focused on what we're here to do, and that's to try to win. And I think it's just been cool to see the Browns. I don't know if culture is the word, but just there's just a difference in the professionalism and mindset that you see from this team. I think it's a testament, yes, to Stefanski, but also to a lot, like you mentioned, like a lot of these veterans who, the Browns have a lot of no nonsense players. They, even a guy like Nick Chubb, I don't know how much of a leader he is, quote unquote, but that's a guy that's not going to complain about anything. You're not going to hear him complain about anything. And when you see the impact and the way he's sort of rubbed off on Kareem Hunt, it's been fun to watch that bond between those two guys and see them sort of take on a little bit of aspects of each other's personalities. You hear people talk about how Kareem Hunt brings out a little bit more personality in Nick Chubb, and that's great. But also, I think Nick Chubb has instilled a little bit more professionalism in Kareem Hunt, and you just see all of this happening on the Browns, and it's just refreshing. They just look like a competent NFL team. And I'm not sitting here to tell you that the Browns are going to win playoff games. I'm not here to tell you that the Browns are a top tier NFL team. They're not. They've got work to do. They, in a lot of positions, they need to add a lot of depth and they need to add talent. But the Browns are different. And I just don't know how you watch this season and how your people are trying to have the same conversations and the same complaints about a franchise that is completely changed in the way it conducts itself. And
no. We're observant, not delusional. I mean, we know that the Browns are 4 or 5 point underdogs against Tennessee, and they could lose by 3 touchdowns, and it wouldn't shock anybody.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But even if they do, I have more confidence than I've ever had in my entire life as a Browns fan that they're going to take it on the chin. They're going to do what they can to move on and come back better than they were that week, the next week, or not let it define their season. And sure, maybe even in a situation where it goes downhill and they lose 2-3 games in a row, I don't get the sense that the stuff that they've built getting to 8-3 is going to go by the wayside.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a big thing. It's, so even if the only games they win from here on out are the 2 New York games, even if those are, or even if they only win one of those 2 New York games and they still finish the year at 9-7, they'll be disappointed that they didn't finish better. But I think there will be a huge sense of I don't know if accomplishment is the right word, but and not even satisfaction, but just this idea that they've laid the groundwork for something. And I think there'll be an eagerness to come back next year and build on this even more. And so that's what I just see all this as. This year has been complete gravy for me. I keep using that word a lot lately in talking to people, but it is. It's like I I had such low expectations for this team coming in. Like I thought with particularly with them not having much of a training camp, not really having time to install the offense the way they wanted to. And plus just in general with some of the talent that I wasn't sure about, and I was still last year was still so fresh in my mind. I really thought this was like going to be like a 5 or 6 win team, and so uh, all of this is just for me setting up what is going to come next, because I think it's pretty clear the Browns went into the season with the idea that we're not really going to address the defense. We're instead going to give Baker the tools that we can try to figure out what we have in Baker. And I think that now in this offseason, they can go hard on that defense. I think you will see a radically different looking defense next year. And so I do. I just feel like things are moving in the right direction, and it's nothing but fun for me.
All right, so let's talk about something where things are not going in the right direction. Let's talk about your Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah.
You are one of the biggest defenders and fans of Tristan Thompson. So I'm just going to I'm going to give you the floor and let you start. Obviously,
Sure.
How did that make you feel? And then why do you think you're such a giant Tristan Thompson defender?
Yeah. So the funny thing about Tristan is, for his first couple of years in the league, I was not a fan. I was really confounded by, certainly his offensive skill set. It was very raw, and I just felt like he wasn't really developing that well on that end of the floor. And for better or for worse, when you're the number 4 overall pick in the draft, like I really expected a quicker impact out of him, I think. And so for the first couple of years, I was actually pretty hard on him. I felt like I was harder on him than most Cavs fans were. But the thing about Tristan is that, like, over time he became really such a fundamental part of what the Cavs tried to do. Certainly with his offensive rebounding. I mean, his offensive rebounding was out of this world. And in his defense, and a team that traditionally has never played a lot of defense, he's tended to be that sort of last line of defense for the Cavs. And he sort of just took on this role of that he was just going to be this sort of dependable rock. You weren't going to have these big highs with him or necessarily these big lows. Like, he was just going to be this dependable guy that was always there. And he mentioned it in his Instagram post today, his farewell post, talking about like sort of that blue collar Cleveland mentality, and that he just really embraced that role, and it became like the perfect fit for the identity of Cleveland. And again, he was a part of the championship team, and he was one of the starters on the team that won an NBA championship. And so he spent a lot of years, and he saw a lot of different phases of the Cavs. He was there with Byron Scott, in those years. He was there for the Mike Brown year.
The Byron Scott year.
Yeah, and
was it multiple years?
That.
How many years was Byron Scott?
2 years with that group, or was it even 3? It might have even been 3. I think he might have gotten 3 years, and then we had the 1 year of Mike Brown when he came back, which where Dan Gilbert said he was wrong to have fired him, and then he fired him after a year again. So he was there through all of that. Then comes LeBron. LeBron comes back, and he sort of it really that was really the change for him.
Little sidebar there. So when the Cavs rehired Mike Brown, That was when I was still doing the Scene podcast in addition to the Waiting for Next Year podcast. And so they they uh they hooked me up with Windhurst, who was like watching, I think, some scrimmages in the Bahamas or something. That NBA reporter life is pretty
Yeah.
sweet. But I just remember talking to him as somebody who knows the Cavs and knows Dan Gilbert, and he was just borderline baffled that any franchise would ever go back to that well, go back to a well and welcome a coach back. It's like maybe one of the favorite podcasts I've ever done. Unfortunately, I did it somebody else's banner, but
Yeah.
it you have to say it 3 times just to realize how crazy it is and how much money they
Yeah.
paid Mike Brown to not work.
What's really funny about that too is like how fortunate they were probably that like LeBron wiped out that memory. Like it's so easy to forget that the year before LeBron was here, that Mike Brown was the coach again of the Cavs, you know. So some of that stuff is pretty funny. And then even like the David Blatt situation, like the Cavs were really cycling through the coaches there for a while, very Browns-esque. But I think once LeBron came, Tristan really soaked up a lot of what LeBron was selling. I think he was quicker to adapt to LeBron's mentality, quicker than Kyrie was. And I think, he really took it a lot more seriously at that moment and really transformed himself into a guy that LeBron was comfortable with, playing all those years. And I think that, I think all that was important. And then, certainly when LeBron leaves,
But
Tristan was still.
don't you think it just fit Tristan's style, the work hard mentality, the grinder?
Yeah.
That's not Kyrie. Say what you want about Kyrie, and I think you and I are nicer to him than a lot of Cavs fans who are bitter about the way it all went down, and I can get myself into a bitter mode too if I really try hard.
I'm very bitter about it, but yeah.
But the way those two, Kyrie and Tristan, were never going to get along as well as LeBron and Tristan, just based on who they are, what kind of guys they are.
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Like, there's no doubt about, like, Kyrie wouldn't be the guy that he was and the guy that he is if he didn't have that mentality that he didn't need to learn from LeBron, right? Like he was carving his own path. I do think, like, over time, like there's definitely things like I don't know what happened between those two, LeBron and Kyrie, exactly, and where their relationship stands. But I do think Kyrie did take some things away from LeBron, in the end, and certainly, like, I mean, obviously they coexisted well enough to win a championship. But I think you're absolutely right. Like, it definitely. For Tristan, it made a lot more sense for him to be like, okay, I'm gonna just fit into what's going on here. But that's part of what I appreciated about Tristan, and I just, even when LeBron left and things changed really fast and the Cavs really turned into a disaster, it was just always nice having Tristan still be around and be a calming voice in that locker room. He was proud to have that leadership mantle, and he talked often about him and Kevin Love trying to still keep whatever they could of that championship culture. Like, yes, the performance on the court was not championship caliber anymore, but it doesn't mean the preparation behind the scenes wasn't there and the work and what that all entails. And it was good to have that kind of voice in the locker room. And so I'm sad to see it go, we're left with Kevin Love now. That's all that's left of that. I mean, obviously Delly is back, with the team. But really from the core players that won that championship, it's Kevin Love is the last man standing, and that's hard to believe, and it's just bittersweet for me. I wish Tristan nothing but the best, but I just wish he wouldn't have gone to Boston, man.
See, Boston doesn't bother me right now because the Cavs don't matter. I mean, I'll never like Boston, but they don't have a chance either. Even with Tristan, they can't win a championship, so it's kind of whatever. You know, when
Yeah.
when Kyrie went to Boston, I was annoyed Kyrie left, and I thought the trade was bad, but you know that trade had a chance to be much better than it turned out.
Yeah.
But
Ugh,
no,
geez.
did you want Tristan to stay? Did you want?
I did. I wanted as many, like I wanted him to finish his career in Cleveland. Like I wish, like I want all those guys that won the championship to finish their career in Cleveland. It doesn't happen. I get it, but like it's just crazy that that was still. I mean, only 4 years ago, but like the how quickly everything is turned over in this franchise so fast. It's just been a bummer to me. I I just wish the Cavs could have, as a franchise or as an organization, could have done a little bit more to hang on to some stability. And even if it did, like I look at like I compare it to like the Dallas Mavericks. Like the Mavericks never won another championship after they got theirs, but like they made some moves and they were never quite as good. And a lot of the moves they tried to make didn't really work out for Dirk, but like they still held on to that like identity and culture for a lot of years, and I think they're still respected as a franchise right now, even if they're not. Well, I mean, they're certainly on the rise again. I think you'll see them be a lot better, but uh, like whereas the Cavs just turned themselves into a complete non-factor in the NBA. I mean, you couldn't be more irrelevant to the NBA than the Cleveland Cavaliers are right now, and that's what's just frustrating to me. And so that's why like losing Tristan now, to me, it just takes us another rung down the irrelevant hole, and so that's why from a pure like financial and basketball sense, did it make sense to keep him? Maybe not, but I just think like Tristan Thompson is still a good basketball player, and I'd just rather the Cavs have good basketball players. And so it's just been tough. It's a lot of it has just been really demoralizing to me. Is some of that championship meant so much to me, and this franchise has meant so much to me, and to see them just wither away into a state that is really rough right now, it's just been hard to watch.
Yeah. At the same time, it's like, can you imagine Tristan Thompson being a part of the next relevant Cavaliers team?
No, it wasn't going to
Um,
happen.
no, it's not going to happen, and ultimately, I kind of feel about it in a way that's similar to Corey Kluber. I think it's just time. I think it's just time. There
Yeah.
was never going to be a happy ending, and so this is just fine. It's just
Yeah.
fine. And also I'm not rooting against Tristan Thompson. I just don't think that, a hustle player is a good bet, too far down into his career. I just don't. We saw how quickly Anderson Varejao fell off. We saw how Tristan himself fell off after being dragged to so many finals by LeBron. We've talked about this before too. Not everybody is built to handle the kind of beating that a LeBron-led team, the schedule that it puts you through. And I think Tristan's career really took a hit for 2 or 3 years as he recovered or tried to recover from those deep playoff runs.
Yeah, we started to see injuries impact Tristan in a way they never did early in his career. He was Mr. Resilient for so many years. And you're certainly right. Like, as you saw those injuries creep in and nagging things just kept coming up, and like you'd get him back for a little bit and then he'd be hurt right away again. And that was certainly frustrating. And so you're right. Like I'm just a sentimental guy with this stuff. Like I just am. And like, so that's why for me, I'm able to sit here and say, well, my job isn't on the line. I'm not the GM. So for me, sure, I'd love to have Tristan play out the rest of his career with the Cavs, because for me, I viewed it as I don't expect the Cavs to win anytime soon anyways. I might as well enjoy getting to watch these guys that played a part on that championship for a few more years. But I'm the same way with Kevin Love. Like, I don't want the Cavs to trade him. Like a lot of people want the Cavs to trade him. I shouldn't say like I don't want them to trade him, but like obviously, like if that's what he wants, like I kind of want to honor his wishes. But just selfishly, like I want to watch Kevin Love play basketball. Like, and I'm proud to have Kevin Love be ambassador for this franchise, like especially the guy that he is off the court and all that. So, I'd love all these guys to be around as long as they want.
Although it was funny to see him exasperated on the court at certain points last year and not
It was
really.
not some of his finer moments last season, I would say. No, but
Yeah, I mean, it's how it goes. It's how it
yeah.
goes. It's not the end of the world. All right. So before we go, watch anything good lately? What are you keeping up with? What non-sports things do you have to recommend to people? If you want me to buy you a few minutes, I can talk about a couple of things first.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll let you go first if you got something queued up.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was funny. Last night we watched the finale of The Undoing, which is a miniseries on HBO. It got a huge amount of talk, but it I think it got overrated by the pandemic. It was like doing an impression of a good show. It had Nicole Kidman, but they let her sing the opening song, and that was just like emblematic of the whole show. It just felt like trying to be something, and it didn't quite hit, but like it still was a good mystery, had some good cliffhangers, had some who done it action where you really wanted to see what happened next, even though the acting was kind of robotic and whatever. Little courtroom stuff to end the show, and I'm going spoiler free, but it was probably worth the ride, even though it's like a B or a C level show.
Very nice. So one thing, like, this isn't new, obviously, and I'm sure we've probably talked about this, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'm sure we probably talked about it before on the podcast, but I'm sort of watching it with new eyes as I've been listening to the Binge Mode podcast go through their take on the MCU. And it's really been fun so like what I'll do is I'll listen to an episode on, the movies they're going through in the order that they were released. And then, and then watch the movie after I will listen to the episode, and catching a lot of the Easter eggs that I wasn't aware of, because they're much bigger Marvel fans than I am. Like they know like sort of the aspects of the comics, and they talk about a lot of that in the podcast. And so it's just been sort of fun to see it with a different set of eyes, sort of. And so I would actually recommend, like, if people aren't familiar with Binge Mode, to check it out. It's you will not find people more passionate about the series that they do. They've done Game of Thrones, they've done Star Wars, and I think they did. I didn't listen. I think they did Harry Potter. But now they're doing Harry Potter. And now they're doing MCU, and it's so that's been really fun, and so I'd recommend that. Otherwise, if I'm not watching that lately, I've just been watching a lot of YouTube. Strangely enough,
I've been watching a lot of live music on YouTube.
Yeah, I've done live music. I've done a lot of like cooking stuff, health stuff, all that good stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where I've been lately. Like, rather than watching shows lately, I find it easier because, like, I haven't been doing near as much like sort of like long binge sessions where I'm just going to sit on the couch and watch a bunch of episodes in a row. So for me, YouTube has actually been really good because it's shorter intervals and I can get in and out of it a lot quicker.
Andrew, hang on. We've got, we're actually getting some questions from the audience.
Oh,
you ready?
Yeah.
Who is your favorite X-Man?
From Dymaco? My favorite X-Man, Wolverine.
I'm gonna go with Storm, but it doesn't stop there. We have more questions. Ready?
Yep.
Who is your favorite Jedi?
Jedi.
I'll go first. I'm gonna go with Rey. Does she count?
Absolutely, she counts.
Yes.
And that really sucks because I wish I would have thought to say her first, because she probably really is my favorite. Yeah, I mean, I gotta go Luke then. It's boring, but like we can get into a whole thing here, but like I have some problems with the whole Jedi Council that um I
See, I kind of figured it was
makes
going
them
to
not
be
my
Yoda.
favorite.
I was figuring it was going to be Yoda. But
Yeah, not so much.
all right, we got one more.
All right.
Who's your favorite Cleveland-based parody NFL podcast?
I mean, I don't listen to any. Are there any good ones?
I don't think so.
I'm not, doesn't
All
really
right.
register with me.
Anyway, where were we?
Um, I think I was just wrapping up my YouTube stuff, just saying that's kind of like the more digestible 10-minute YouTube videos that makes it easier if I would then want to, do something else. I can jump into something else. So for whatever reason, that's just kind of where I've been lately. So
I'm trying really hard to do the live music thing and scratch that itch. It's a little bit hard, especially if I'm just kind of like by myself. So I've been doing it, but I convinced my wife to watch one with me, but then I had to watch something that she likes. So we watched, and I got to admit, I enjoyed it very much. I watched in a 45-minute Ed Sheeran concert with my wife.
mm,
And it's not exactly my favorite kind of music, but that dude is a killer. He's
yeah,
amazing, amazingly talented. He played the entire thing, just him and a guitar with loop pedals. And so he was singing harmonies with himself. He was playing
yeah,
guitar loops. It was
really good singer. He's a
insanely entertaining,
phenomenal singer. I really like his voice.
especially when he can harmonize with himself three, four
Yeah, that's pretty
times.
cool. That's pretty cool. Like it's like I'm in the same boat. Like it's not my favorite kind of music. Like I'm not going to sit here and say I listen to his music a lot or
No.
anything like that. But certainly I can respect the vocal talent for sure.
So yeah, I guess that's about it. Although we did have one more question.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean,
what's
it's
your
got to be the
favorite
Tate skins.
appetizer at Rodeo
It's
Palojas?
it's the Tate skins. Does anybody go there and not get Tate skins?
I mean, I do love pickle chips, but no, you're right. It's Tate skins.
Yeah, it's Tate skins all day, every day.
All right. I think that's where we got to stop. We should wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for listening and watching and all this, the multimedia experience that has become the waitingfornextyear.com podcast, soon to be part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next time. See ya.